Hello, my name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 34 years old, and if you look me up today, you'd see press clippings, investor articles, headlines like, "The Woman Who Rewired America's Tech Future." I run a multi-million-dollar AI hardware company on the East Coast, and I sit on 3 executive boards. People call me brilliant, resilient, a visionary. But behind every compliment is a scar. Behind every triumph is a betrayal that cracked me in half. And it all started with a man I once called Dad. I still remember the taste in my mouth that day, bitterness, like copper and salt. The way my throat tightened when he said it, cool as ice. "You're not even my daughter." Right there, right in front of everyone. No hesitation, no remorse. Just a single swing of a verbal knife that made everything, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every time I chose them over me, collapse like a glass castle under a hammer. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the moment before the world caved in. It was a Saturday evening in late October, and the air in Trenton was starting to smell like burnt leaves and cheap whiskey. We were all gathered in the Monroe family house, once warm, once filled with music and smells of Mom's buttermilk cornbread. That night, though, it felt like a morgue, cold, hollow. Everyone dressed too well, like they were playing a part in some twisted play. I should have known something was wrong. The way my mother wouldn't look at me. The way my brother Connor kept tugging at the sleeves of his designer hoodie like he had somewhere better to be. The way Maddie was half glued to her phone, posing her lips into pout after pout for some influencer campaign that probably paid more than my first year in grad school. And then, Frank cleared his throat. Not Dad. Not anymore. He cleared his throat and stood at the head of the dining room table like some faux king, about to announce who got what in his crumbling kingdom. "I've made a decision," he said. Simple words, no emotion. But I could already feel the ground starting to shift beneath me. "I've finalized the deal. Monroe Circuit Works is sold." I blinked. "What?" I asked. "You said you were still thinking—" "I wasn't," he interrupted. "The paperwork was done last week." Last week? I had worked 18-hour days the week before, spent 2 nights at the plant, debugging a sensor error that could have cost us a key contract in Massachusetts. And while I was busy fixing the systems I built, he was selling it off like a piece of used furniture. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. He didn't flinch. "And I've decided how the profits will be split," he added. Profits? Split? That was the first time I noticed Connor smirking. "And Maddie?" She had already slipped her phone out to film the moment. Of course she did. "I'll keep 50%, Frank said. "The rest will be divided equally between Connor and Madison." My stomach clenched. I waited for my name, for the part where he said, "And Rachel gets something, anything." But no. "And Rachel?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He shrugged. "You'll figure it out. You're capable." Capable. That word. That damn word. As if I hadn't given everything I had to that business. As if I hadn't saved it from total collapse 5 years ago. As if I hadn't been the one who shouldered it when Frank spent months drinking and hiding from bill collectors. "You don't get anything," he said flatly, "because you never needed help." I couldn't breathe. And then he leaned forward, voice low, so low I almost didn't hear it. "Besides, you're not mine, Rachel." The air left the room. I froze. "What?" I asked, eyes wide, my voice cracked like glass. "What did you just say?" He looked me dead in the face. "You're not my biological daughter," he said. "Your mother was pregnant before we met. I raised you out of obligation." Silence. Connor chuckled, like this was all some sick joke. Maddie's phone was still rolling. "And my mother?" My mother didn't speak, didn't deny it. She just looked down at her lap, ashamed or scared, or both. I stood. The chair screeched back against the floor. "You knew," I whispered. "This whole time you knew." Frank took a sip of his scotch and said nothing. It felt like my skin had been peeled back. I had sacrificed everything for that man, for his name, for a company I thought was my legacy. I dropped out of MIT for him. I spent my 20s cleaning up his messes. I had breathed life into Monroe Circuit Works. And now? I wasn't even family. I was a ghost in their house, an outsider at their table, a stranger in the only home I had ever known. "Why?" I finally asked, tears stinging my eyes. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Frank looked up at me, stone-faced. "Because I didn't think you'd take it so personally." "Take it personally? Take it personally?" My fists clenched. Connor leaned back and muttered, "Guess all those sleepless nights weren't worth much, huh?" Maddie, ever the sugar snake, added, "Honestly, Rachel, you should be grateful. Dad still gave you a place all these years. Just let it go. Let it go. Let it go." I walked out that night into the cold air, wind ripping through my coat, and I realized something. I had never belonged in that house, never belonged at that table, never belonged in that name. They hadn't just sold the business, they had sold me. But what none of them knew was that I was done begging, done pleasing, done proving. They thought that was the end of me? No. That night was only the beginning. Because from the ashes of their betrayal, I would rise, and when I did, they would watch with empty hands and bitter hearts as the girl they discarded rewrote every rule they once used to control her. Has someone ever made you feel like a stranger in your own family? Like no matter how hard you try, it'll never be enough? Share your thoughts below. Hit like, leave a comment, or tag someone who needs to hear this. Because what happens next? They never saw it coming. I don't remember how I got home that night. I remember the way the door to the Monroe house sounded when it slammed behind me. Like finality. Like the end of a chapter I hadn't agreed to close. My boots crunched over the gravel as I staggered down the walkway like a soldier retreating from a battlefield. Except this one was drenched in betrayal, not blood. I reached my car, but my hands shook too much to start the ignition, so I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, trying to breathe. "You're not even my daughter." That sentence didn't echo. It hung, suspended in the air like a noose waiting to tighten. And my mother, she didn't deny it. She didn't speak, not once. She let him gut me with those words, let him rip me from the only identity I'd ever known. I don't think she realized she killed something that night, not just the illusion of family, but the very core of who I thought I was. I eventually drove to my apartment. My studio in downtown Trenton felt colder than ever. I hadn't decorated it much. I was always too busy at the plant. It was supposed to be temporary, just a place to crash between saving Monroe Circuit Works and planning my next big move. Now it felt like a coffin. I dropped my coat on the floor, collapsed onto the couch, and just stared at the ceiling. For hours. No music, no lights, just silence. And that one phrase playing on loop, "You're not even my daughter." The next morning, I didn't get out of bed, nor the day after that. I ignored my phone, ignored the messages from my assistant asking about contracts, ignored the emails from vendors, the inquiries from clients. I even ignored Madison's Instagram post, a blurry photo of her holding a champagne flute with the caption, "So grateful for fresh starts." I nearly threw my phone across the room. They didn't just cut me out, they celebrated it. And still, no call from my mother. I guess silence runs in her veins. By the third day, the numbness started to morph into something else. Not sadness, not grief. Something sharper, hotter, rage, but not the kind you explode with. No, This kind was slow, cold, like metal heating beneath your skin, whispering, "Remember what they did. Remember how they smiled. Remember how they buried you with a toast." That's when I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the old factory. It had already been stripped. A cheap vinyl sign now read, "Tech Nova Holdings." The parking lot was empty. The building, quiet, lifeless. But I had a key. I slipped inside through the side door, same one I used to sneak out of during all-nighters. The place reeked of fresh paint and betrayal. My office was still intact, but the photos I had taped to the wall were gone. The plans I left on the corkboard were removed. Even the desk felt foreign, like someone else had moved into my skin. I walked the floor slowly, remembering. That's where I redesigned the automation system that cut costs by 20%. That's the loading dock where I stayed up all night with a busted generator just to meet a delivery deadline. That's the corner where I caught Frank crying once, head in his hands, too ashamed to admit he couldn't fix anything. I fixed it. I saved it. And they sold it like it was a second-hand bicycle. I leaned against the wall, slid down to the floor, and let myself feel it for the first time since that family meeting. The grief, the anger, the abandonment. It all came crashing through me in waves that stole my breath. And when it passed, I knew I had a choice. Either stay broken or start building something they could never touch. Not again, not ever. The day I left the factory, I didn't slam the door. I closed it slowly, like sealing a tomb. But I didn't cry anymore. I had done that. Now there was only silence inside me, and beneath it, something beginning to burn. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew why I had to do it. I wasn't going to get revenge by screaming or begging. No. I was going to rise so high that when they looked up, all they'd see was the blinding glare of everything they gave away. It started with the list. I opened my old notebook, the one I used when I first began rebuilding Monroe Circuit Works. The cover was battered, the pages worn from years of grease and coffee and pencil smudges. But inside, gold, raw ideas, unfinished prototypes, unused partnerships, and a dream that never died. On the first blank page, I wrote 2 words, "Mine now." Then I began to write. I outlined what I would need to start over: capital, space, a team, licenses. Every bullet point felt like a brick being laid beneath my feet, something to stand on again. But it wasn't just about rebuilding a company. It was about reclaiming myself. I'd lived too long trying to prove I was enough for someone else's dream. Now it was time to chase my own. I reached out to 3 people the next day, people who had worked under me, believed in me, followed me even when the Monroe name wasn't worth a nickel. The first was Troy Dawson, my lead systems engineer. Sharp, loyal, the kind of mind that could reverse engineer anything from a toaster to a missile. Second was Lauren Park, a logistics genius with a sense of humor that could disarm an angry supplier in 5 seconds flat. And third was Marisol Vega. She was the hardest call. Marisol had been my closest friend at the plant, back when the coffee machine was more reliable than Frank Monroe. She'd stood by me through the hardest days of expansion. She knew the smell of solder in my hair, the caffeine shakes, the nights I fell asleep at my desk. But after the sale, she went silent. I wasn't sure what side she was on. Still, I sent the text. "Starting something new. Need people I can trust. You in?" She didn't reply right away. But 3 hours later, she showed up outside my apartment, holding a cup of black coffee and wearing that same old denim jacket from the plant. "I figured you'd need this," she said, holding the cup out like a peace offering. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. We worked from my living room the first 2 weeks. Post-it notes covered every inch of wall space, empty takeout boxes piled beside the couch. We brainstormed day and night, often falling asleep mid-sentence and waking up to find someone had kept writing in their dreams. The vision was simple: cutting-edge circuit designs, clean energy compatibility, consumer-level pricing. We called it Phoenix Circuitry. It wasn't flashy. It was born in silence, in hurt, in fire, and we knew we'd need help to take it beyond four walls and a couch. So I called in the only favor I had left, Dr. Elise Warner. She had been my professor at MIT, the first person who told me I had the instincts of a disruptive engineer and the work ethic of someone running from ghosts. She wasn't wrong. Elise had left MIT 2 years ago to run a tech incubator in Brooklyn. When I called her, she picked up before the first ring. "Rachel Monroe," she said, her voice cool but warm like it always was. "I was wondering when you'd stop surviving and start building again." I laughed, surprised by how much I needed to hear that. "I have something. I just need air and maybe a little sunlight." She invited me to Brooklyn that Friday. Walking into her incubator was like stepping into the future. Transparent circuit boards, AR goggles being tested by interns, 3D printers humming like beehives. It was the kind of place I'd once dreamed of bringing Monroe Circuit Works into before the dream was sold to the highest bidder. Elise handed me a clipboard as I entered. "Here's a desk. Here's a temporary badge. No promises. But show me something that scares the competition, and I'll clear the floor." That night, I didn't sleep. I designed. I sketched out a new kind of modular chipset, lightweight, fast, recyclable, self-adaptive to voltage fluctuations, something smart homes and medical devices could use interchangeably. By dawn, my desk was covered in diagrams. Elise looked them over with the expression of someone inspecting a treasure map. And then she said 6 words I hadn't heard in a long time. "Let's make them regret everything." That day, we became real. We registered Phoenix Circuitry as a Delaware-based LLC, filed the provisional patents, secured lab access, and Elise, she put in a quiet $75,000 as seed capital, no strings. "This is an investment in rage," she said with a smirk, "the most underutilized energy source on Earth." She was right. Every time I sat down at the desk, I thought of Frank, of how he couldn't even look me in the eye when he said I wasn't his, of how my mother stared at her lap like the floor might swallow her guilt whole, of how Connor chuckled like he'd won something, of how Maddie documented my disinheritance like it was a YouTube prank, and I let that fuel me. My team expanded, carefully. Troy brought in a friend from Intel. Marisol reached out to an old contact in sustainable manufacturing. Lauren coordinated shipping prototypes directly from Brooklyn to potential testers around the country. We had nothing, but we had momentum. And in this world, that's everything. One day, Marisol sat beside me at the workbench and asked, "Do you ever think about going back?" "To what?" I asked, soldering a prototype edge. "To them, to Frank, to your mother. Closure, maybe?" I paused, then said, "No, I didn't want closure. I wanted to build something so loud, so undeniable, that it was the closure. But what I didn't know yet was that they were watching, that the past I thought I left behind was about to knock on my door again. Only this time, I would decide whether to open it." The morning it happened started like any other. A bitter cup of black coffee, my laptop balancing on my knee, a new batch of heat stress simulations failing at 2.8 volts. Marisol was already cursing in Spanish under her breath. Troy was chewing on a pencil like it was a nicotine patch. Lauren was on the phone haggling with a supplier who thought rush delivery meant sometime before the next presidential election. In other words, progress. And then the knock came. It was soft, hesitant, almost polite. which is how you know something's off. No one ever knocks politely on a startup door unless they want something you're not ready to give. I opened the door and froze. Connor Monroe, in the flesh, wearing a bomber jacket worth more than the furniture in our lab. Aviators hanging from his collar like some sad attempt at swagger. And that same crooked grin, the one that always curled just slightly when he smelled blood in the water. "Hey, sis," he said, like we were meeting at a family barbecue instead of after months of cold silence and corporate betrayal. I didn't say a word, just stared at him. He looked down the hallway, then leaned in like this was a secret. "Can we talk?" I stepped back, arms folded. "You've got 60 seconds. After that, I start charging for emotional labor." He laughed, but his eyes darted. He wasn't nearly as cocky as he pretended to be. "I heard you're doing something. Tech stuff. Startup." "And?" He scratched the back of his neck. "I wanted to say congrats." I raised an eyebrow. He wasn't here to congratulate me, not a chance. "Cut the crap, Connor," I said. "What do you want?" He hesitated, and that was when I saw it. The crack. The panic. The thing he didn't want to say out loud. "I messed up," he muttered. There it was. "What happened?" I asked, crossing my arms tighter. He let out a slow breath and said, "Remember Dad's amazing financial advisor? Yeah. Turns out he was running a side hustle, Ponzi scheme. Half the money's gone. And the rest? Locked up in tax investigations." I blinked. "So, let me get this straight. You and Maddie both got your inheritance. $500,000 each. And you blew through yours. I invested." "In what?" His silence was answer enough. Gambling, most likely, or NFTs, or one of his idiot crypto friends pitching the next Uber, but for pets. He glanced at my desk behind me. Our sketches, our prototypes, the real work. "Rachel," he said, "you built all this without any help?" That word, help. It crawled out of his mouth like an insult. "No, Connor," I said, voice sharp. "I built this without lies, without shortcuts, without stabbing anyone in the back. That's the difference." He nodded slowly, and for the first time in his life, he looked small, like a boy who had finally been left alone in a dark room with no one to rescue him. "Can you help me?" he whispered, and just like that, every memory came back. The smirk as Dad stripped me of my inheritance, the laugh when I stormed out of the house, the silence after the world found out I wasn't one of them. And now he wanted help? I didn't scream, didn't throw anything. I simply said, "No," and shut the door. He knocked again, softer this time. "Rach, Maddie's in trouble too. The IRS is auditing her. Her influencer contract's dried up. They're threatening charges." "Then she can pout in court," I said through the door. "I'm serious," he begged. "We need help." I opened the door just wide enough for him to see the fury in my eyes. "You needed help? Where was your help when Dad told me I wasn't his daughter? When Mom said nothing? When you laughed in my face and called me pathetic?" He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. "You didn't need me then, and you don't get me now." I slammed the door again, this time harder. Troy looked up from his desk. "That the idiot brother?" I nodded. He chuckled. "Damn, you should have made him sign an NDA just to talk to you." We laughed. And that laugh, it felt good, because that was the moment I realized something. I wasn't trying to prove anything to them anymore. Not my worth, not my loyalty, not my love. I didn't owe them, and their ship, it was sinking without me. That night I got an email from an address I hadn't seen in years. Subject: "Rachel, I need to see you, please." From Evelyn Monroe, my mother. The email stared at me for almost an hour before I touched it. Rachel, I need to see you, please. No subject line, no apology, just that. I hovered my cursor over the trash icon more than once, but I couldn't do it. She had stayed silent through it all, through the lie, the betrayal, the unraveling of everything I thought my life was. She had let Frank humiliate me, strip me of my identity, and never said a word in my defense. And now she wanted a meeting? Why? What did she think she could possibly say? I don't know why I replied. Curiosity, maybe. Or anger masquerading as curiosity. Or maybe deep down, some broken fragment of a child still clinging to the hope that a mother might one day stand up for her daughter. We agreed to meet at a cafe in Hamilton. Neutral territory. I didn't want to return to the Monroe house, not even to its sidewalk. When I arrived, she was already there. She hadn't changed much, still wore her hair in the same careful twist, still wore that same chain with the locket I had gifted her for Mother's Day when I was 16. Her eyes, though, those were different. Hollow, sunken with regret, or maybe just age. She stood when she saw me, half smiling like I was an old friend she hadn't seen in years. I didn't smile back. We sat. The air between us was thick, like breathing through wool. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said softly. Then why did you ask? She blinked, clearly not ready for the tone I was bringing. I needed to explain. You should have done that months ago, I snapped. Before he stood in front of the whole family and told me I wasn't his. Before you looked down at your lap like I was a stranger. Before you let them sell everything I built. She looked down now, just like she did that night. I froze, she whispered. I was scared. Of what? I said. Of telling the truth? She reached into her purse, pulled out an envelope, pushed it toward me. I wrote this the night you left, but I never sent it. I didn't touch it. You should read it, she urged. I slid it across the table but didn't open it. Not yet. I didn't know how to defend you that night, she continued. Frank, he wasn't always cruel. He raised you like his own at first. He really tried. Until I became better than him, I said flatly. Her eyes widened. Rachel. No, let's be honest for once. He saw me growing stronger, smarter, more capable. He hated that. It made him feel small. And you, I leaned forward, my voice like glass. You let him shrink me to fit inside his ego. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't stop. I spent my whole life trying to be enough. Enough for you. Enough for a man who wasn't even my father. And when I finally rose above every failure he handed me, you helped him bury me. I didn't mean to, she said, voice cracking. I thought he'd calm down. I thought it would blow over. Blow over? I scoffed. You let him detonate my entire identity in front of the people who were supposed to be my family. Silence. Then she whispered the question I wasn't prepared for. Do you want to know who your father really is? I blinked. What? The man I was with before Frank. He was a good man, Rachel. An artist. But I was scared. I was pregnant. I thought I needed stability. So you chose Frank, I said bitterly. I chose a roof, she said. I chose survival. And there it was, the truth behind the silence. She hadn't chosen Frank because she loved him. She'd chosen him because he was safe. And I had been a living reminder of the man she had loved but abandoned. She dug again into her purse and pulled out a photograph. Old, faded. A man standing by a lake, smiling, holding a paintbrush in one hand and a baby, me, in the other. That's your father, she said. His name was Thomas. I took the photo, looked at it. A strange warmth fluttered in my chest. I never forgot him, she said, tears falling freely now. But I buried him. and I buried the part of you that came from him." She reached across the table, her hand trembling. "Rachel, I am so sorry." For the first time in years, I didn't know what to say. I didn't forgive her, not fully, but something shifted. I saw her, not just as a mother who failed me, but as a woman who had also made impossible choices and lived in silence ever since. I took the envelope, stood, and said quietly, "Thank you, but this doesn't fix anything." "I know," she nodded. I walked out without looking back. But as I stepped into the cold, something else happened. For the first time since that awful night, I felt lighter, not healed, but no longer holding a weight that didn't belong to me. That evening I returned to the lab. Lauren was whiteboarding figures. Troy was tinkering with a new chip design. Marisol looked up as I entered. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, I think I am." Then I opened the envelope. Inside was the letter, in her handwriting. "My dearest Rachel, I have failed you in more ways than I can count. Not because I didn't love you, but because I let fear speak louder than truth. I want you to know, you are my daughter in every way that matters, not in bloodlines, not in names, but in strength, in brilliance, in fire." I folded it gently, placed it in my desk drawer, and never spoke of it again. Because from that day forward, I didn't need anyone to give me my identity. I would define it myself. One line of code, one prototype, one victory at a time. It started with an email, not just any email, that email. Subject line, East Coast Tech Founders Conference, keynote invitation. At first I thought it was spam, but then I saw the domain, verified, the sender, real, and the name on the board of hosts, Franklin Monroe. He had weaseled his way into the board of one of the region's largest tech conventions, a desperate move to stay relevant after years of fading headlines and a company he no longer owned. But that didn't stop him from parading around like the king of innovation. According to the press release, he was listed as Strategic Advisor to Legacy Hardware Evolution, which was just a fancy way of saying he once owned something important and wants credit forever. Still, the irony, too sharp to ignore. I read the email 3 times. "Dear Ms. Monroe, we are thrilled to extend an invitation to you as keynote speaker for the Emerging Forces in Hardware Tech session at ECTF 2025. Your work at Phoenix Circuitry has garnered the attention of our leadership team, and we believe your story and innovation will inspire our audience." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. He didn't know. He didn't realize I was the face behind Phoenix Circuitry. Of course he didn't. I'd built it quietly, strategically, never once attaching my name to early press. Every interview went through Troy. Every product launch credited the team, not for ego, but for safety, for peace, for power. But now the light was coming whether I wanted it or not, and Frank Monroe had unknowingly invited his own reckoning. I called Elise. "You're speaking," she said without missing a beat. "I don't think they know it's me," I replied. "That's the point. Let them walk into it blind. Let them seat you on their stage and hand you the mic." There was a long pause. I bit my lip. "What if it's not the right time?" I whispered. "Rachel," Elise said firmly, "the right time is when they least expect you. That's how a phoenix rises, from ashes, not applause." I accepted the invitation the next morning. The planning began immediately. PR rounds, slide deck, rehearsals. Elise handled press coordination. Lauren vetted the live stream vendors. Troy made sure our demo unit was flawless. And Marisol, She made sure I didn't chicken out. "You've hidden long enough," she told me as we practiced my speech. "This is your moment, and no one can take it from you." I nodded, but deep down, I was terrified. Not of failure, but of being seen. Because once I stepped into that spotlight, the silence would end. The name I rebuilt would no longer hide behind initials and a logo. Rachel Monroe would be public, visible, real. The day of the conference arrived like a storm front. I wore a navy pantsuit, sharp, clean, armor. My hair tied up, no nonsense. Professional, powerful. My name tag read, Rachel Monroe, founder and CEO, Phoenix Circuitry. We walked into the conference center together, my team behind me like shadows with purpose. The banners hung from the ceiling. The stage was massive. Rows of chairs, rows of cameras. And in the front row, exactly where I knew he'd be, sat Frank, with Connor and Maddie flanking him like royal guards who didn't know their crown had already rusted. Frank didn't look up, didn't recognize me. Why would he? The last time he saw me, I was broken, worn out, humiliated. Now I was untouchable. The stage assistant waved me up, headset clipped on. "You're on in 5. The lights dimmed. The screen behind me flickered to life with the Phoenix Circuitry logo. I took a deep breath, walked to the podium, looked into the crowd, and watched Frank Monroe's face go pale. There's a silence that happens right before impact, the kind where time slows, the air thickens, and you feel the weight of 1,000 eyes leaning in, waiting to see whether you'll rise or collapse. I stood at the center of that silence. The screen behind me glowed with the Phoenix Circuitry logo, clean lines, minimalist design, a glowing circuit branching like a tree of fire. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. My heartbeat. I gripped the edges of the podium and looked out into the room. And there they were. Frank Monroe, Connor, Maddie, front row, reserved seats. Frank's face was frozen, not with anger, not yet, not even fear, but confusion. He squinted like I was a trick of the light. Connor whispered something to him. Maddie had already pulled out her phone, scanning the conference app for a glitch in scheduling, no doubt. But it was real. I was real. I smiled and began. "Good morning. I'm Rachel Monroe, founder and CEO of Phoenix Circuitry. I want to begin today by asking you a simple question. What does it mean to rebuild something that never should have been broken?" The crowd leaned in. "I'm not just talking about hardware. I'm talking about vision, legacy, identity. We live in a world obsessed with inheritance. Who got what, from whom, and why? But what happens when you inherit nothing? When the only thing passed down to you is silence, or worse, sabotage?" My voice was steady. I kept my eyes forward, never directly on them. That was the twist. I didn't need to name them, didn't need to humiliate them publicly. My success was the exposure. Phoenix Circuitry didn't rise from privilege. It rose from failure, from betrayal, from being told I didn't belong, not in the room, not in the family, not in the future of innovation. That's when I paused and looked directly at Frank. He met my eyes, and I swear, for a second, he shrank. His jaw tightened. His knuckles whitened around the armrest. Maddie froze mid-scroll. Connor stopped whispering. The audience remained locked on me. "Our first prototype was built in a living room," I said, voice sharpening. "Our first investor didn't care about our last names, just our persistence. And today, Phoenix Circuitry is powering clean energy labs in 5 states, assisting surgeries in 3 hospitals, and building components for space-grade sustainability." I let the applause hit, but I didn't let it stop me. This is what happens when you stop waiting for someone to hand you a future and you build it yourself. The next slides rolled through: real numbers, product demos, testimonial clips, hardware stats. Troy and Lauren had set up the live walkthrough flawlessly. Marisol coordinated the live chat feed with one of Elise's interns. By the time I reached the closing slide, the crowd was buzzing. I returned to the mic one last time. I wasn't born into a legacy. I forged one. Pause. And I hope you remember that the next time someone tells you you're not enough. Because maybe, just maybe, what they fear isn't your weakness, but your power. Standing ovation. I stepped back from the podium as the room exploded into applause, all except the front row. Frank stayed seated, clapping politely, hollowly. His face was unreadable. Connor looked like he'd swallowed a battery. Maddie stared forward, shell-shocked. It was done. The spotlight dimmed. The host came out to thank me, but I could barely hear him. I was already walking off stage, the heat of the lights replaced by the cool confidence pouring through my veins. Elise met me backstage, grinning. "You just detonated an empire," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "I just showed them it was already gone." 10 minutes later, I stepped out into the lobby. Reporters, investors, tech heads, students, people coming up, shaking my hand, praising the speech. Some asked about internships. Others wanted photos. A woman with tears in her eyes told me her daughter had just dropped out of engineering school because of gatekeeping and imposter syndrome and now wanted to reapply. And then I saw him, Frank, standing near the double glass doors, arms folded, staring straight at me. No entourage, no swagger, just quiet. He waited until the crowd thinned, then walked over. I could feel the weight of every step he took, like the room slowed again. And when he reached me, he didn't speak at first. He looked at the crowd around me, the applause still echoing through the building. And then he said, "You've built something." It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation, like he was still trying to make sense of it. "Yes," I said, "I have." He nodded, paused, and said, "I didn't expect this." "That makes two of us," I said. He chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "You've always been smart," he said. I waited, but I never thought you had the spine. There it was, the last gasp of ego. I smiled. "I didn't have the spine when I worked for you. I had to grow it after you." He nodded slowly, then whispered, "People are talking. Investors, board members, even Technova." "Good," I said. "They should." He looked down at his shoes. And when he looked up again, there was something flickering behind his eyes. Grief? Regret? Or maybe just the realization that his name no longer carried weight in a room that now applauded mine. He took a breath. I was wrong. It wasn't much, but it was everything, and it was too late. I gave him a small nod, not forgiveness, not hatred, just release, then turned and walked away, because now I was finally free. The press tour began the very next day. Phoenix Circuitry had become a name to remember. Our inbox flooded with partnership requests, keynote offers, investment interest, and media invites. The speech had gone viral within 48 hours. Hashtags trended. YouTube cuts of my closing lines made their way across startup forums and LinkedIn posts. The world had finally caught up to what we were building. And yet, beneath all the buzz, there was something more important, something deeper: control. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defending myself. I wasn't explaining why I belonged in the room. I was the room. I was the stage, the mic, the floodlight. They had tried to erase me, and instead, they had written the prologue of a legacy they couldn't edit. But fate has a way of wrapping up stories with one last twist. The invitation came from Technova Holdings, the very company that bought out Monroe Circuit Works, the name that replaced mine on the factory wall. It was for a board meeting. They wanted to discuss a potential partnership with Phoenix Circuitry, integration, collaboration, co-branding. Elise laughed for a full minute when she saw the message. "They don't know, do they?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "But they're about to." I accepted the meeting, not for vengeance, not for ego, for clarity. I walked into that building, once my battleground, my prison, my proving ground, and didn't flinch. The security guard held the door for me. The receptionist offered coffee. And the boardroom? It was full of familiar faces. And Frank. He sat at the far end of the table, face blank, clearly not expecting me. "Miss Monroe," one of the execs said, rising to shake my hand. "It's an honor to have you here." I nodded politely, took my seat, and let them talk. They praised Phoenix Circuitry's growth, our efficiency, our potential. They floated partnership models, offered shared labs, suggested co-developed products. All numbers, all business. Until the last slide. And there it was, an image of the factory, the one I'd poured years of my life into, rebranded, repackaged, but still mine. "Of course," the exec said, "Frank can guide the transition. He understands the original systems." I raised my hand gently. "Actually," I said, "there's something you should know." The room quieted. Frank shifted uncomfortably. I pulled out a file. Inside was the original blueprint for Monroe Circuit Works' final operational overhaul, the one I had created, my design, my systems, signed by me, dated before the sale. "This," I said, sliding it across the table, "is the architecture Phoenix Circuitry was built from, and this signature," I tapped it lightly, "is why Monroe Circuit Works never truly left my hands." Silence. One exec leaned forward. "I'm sorry. Are you saying—" I smiled. "I'm saying that the intellectual property you bought was built by me. And what Phoenix has now isn't just superior. It's original, legally, creatively, ethically." Frank's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "But you worked for me," he finally stammered. I turned to him. "No, I worked for the idea of us, the idea of family, but you made it clear. I was never part of that." He paled. The execs looked at each other. I leaned back, calm, steady. "So if we move forward, understand this. Phoenix Circuitry leads. We don't co-brand. We don't share. You integrate into us, not the other way around." The room was dead silent. One of the women across the table whispered, "Understood." Frank didn't say a word. He just sat there, silent in a room he once dominated. I stood, smiled, and delivered the final line I'd waited years to say. "Thank you for your time. I have a company to run now, one that remembers who actually built it." And then I left. No slamming doors, no dramatics, just my heels clicking on polished tile, like punctuation at the end of a sentence only I had the right to finish. As I stepped into the sunlit parking lot, Marisol was waiting by the car. "How'd it go?" she asked. I handed her the folder. "They know now." She opened it, smiled. "Did it feel good?" I looked up at the sky, felt the wind brush through my hair, and whispered, "No." She blinked. "No?" It felt done. A week after the boardroom meeting, the silence broke. And not just any silence, the kind that comes after a storm you didn't cause, but finished. It started with an email. Subject: "Let's talk," from Maddie. I didn't open it because I didn't need to. The preview line in the inbox was enough. I've been thinking a lot lately, and I realized how things must have felt from your side. From my side? As if betrayal had two sides. As if watching your sister clap when your identity was shattered could ever be repainted with pastel words and selective memory. Still, I let the email sit there, unopened, unread. A reminder of what returning dignity looks like when it's far too late. That same day, Connor called. I watched the screen light up. Incoming call, Connor Monroe, decline, again and again. By the fourth attempt, I finally let it ring out, just to hear what desperation sounded like in voicemail form. Rachel, hey, look, I know things got ugly, but I'm trying here. I've made mistakes. We all have. But maybe we could meet? Just talk? He paused, swallowed, then added, Dad's not doing great. I think you should know that. I closed the phone, let it fall to the table. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't go back, not even emotionally. The more success came, the more they reappeared like ghosts in the fog, one by one. A former cousin liked my press feature on LinkedIn. An aunt who hadn't spoken to me since the will mess sent me a DM. So proud of you, sweetheart. Always knew you'd rise. Always knew? They weren't proud. They were scared. Scared of how small they now looked in the shadow of what I'd become. Even Frank's old friends, his golf buddies, his factory pals, started showing up. One, Mr. Halston, messaged me on behalf of the Monroe Legacy Committee, asking if I'd consider sponsoring a vocational program in Frank's name. I reread it 3 times just to be sure it wasn't satire. Frank Monroe, the man who sold me out, erased me, disowned me in front of the people I once called family. They wanted me to carry his name forward? I sent a reply. I'm happy to fund the program, but the name will be the Rachel Initiative. Thank you. I never got a response. Some silences are satisfying, but not all. One night, weeks after the conference, I was in the office late. The lab was quiet. Marisol had gone home. The others were out prepping for a hardware showcase in Chicago. I sat at my desk, sipping lukewarm coffee, staring at the folder I'd been ignoring for days. My mother's letter. The real one. Not the brief note she gave me in the cafe, but the full letter she had never sent. Elise had found it among some old files while we were organizing brand archives. Apparently, my mother had forwarded it to her after the conference, with a single line attached. She may not read it now, but maybe one day. I opened it. The first page was handwritten in her looping cursive. Rachel, I never found the courage to speak when I should have. Not when Frank said what he said. Not when you looked at me like I was the one holding the knife. But the truth is, I was. I knew what he would say before he said it. I had known for years that the secret was a ticking bomb. And I did nothing. Because silence was easier. Because keeping the family whole mattered more to me than honoring the truth inside you. But watching you walk out of that house with your back straight, with no one defending you, it haunts me. I wanted to scream your name. I wanted to run after you. But I froze. I always freeze. You didn't get that from me. What you got from me was the ability to love people who didn't deserve it. And that's both a gift and a curse. I hope you learn to love from a distance and live without waiting for apologies. Because if I never get to say it again, I am sorry for the silence, for the surrender, for never standing between you and the damage. Love, Evelyn. I folded the letter slowly, exhaled, let the silence settle over me, not as a burden, but as a balm. She hadn't redeemed herself, but she had acknowledged the wound. And sometimes that's the most healing you'll ever get. It was a Tuesday when I saw Frank again. I hadn't planned to. I didn't know he was going to be there. I had been invited to speak on a panel about clean tech and sustainable electronics at Rutgers, my alma mater. A full circle kind of moment, the kind where you walk back into the halls where you once felt small. Only now, you're the reason they cleared the stage. The panel was packed. Students, professors, industry insiders. There were even a few alumni who had flown in just to hear about Phoenix's new modular platform and its impact on medical supply chains. It was supposed to be another proud moment, another milestone. And then, after the Q&A, as I stepped off stage and shook hands with the dean, I heard someone say, "Rachel." The voice was rougher now, older, slower. I turned, and there he was. Frank. He looked smaller. Not physically, though he'd lost weight, but spiritually. His once commanding posture had slumped. His jawline, once clenched with smug control, now drooped under the weight of years. I didn't speak, just stared. He held a copy of my feature from Forbes Women in Innovation, folded neatly in half. His fingers trembled around the crease. "I didn't know you were speaking here," he said quietly. "I didn't know you were invited," I replied. "I wasn't," he admitted. "I saw the flyer. Figured I'd come." I raised an eyebrow. He cleared his throat. You were good up there." "Thanks." He looked down. Avoided eye contact. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. At the conference. About building what no one handed you." I nodded slowly. Let the silence fill in the rest. He took a shaky breath. "I lost a lot more than the company," he whispered. "I lost the one person who was actually holding it together." I didn't answer, because what was there to say? You don't get to light the match and then mourn the ashes. Still, part of me wanted to ask, why? Why let it go so far? Why say those words? Why act like my entire existence was a footnote in someone else's narrative? Instead, I let him keep talking. "Connor's in therapy now," he said. "Maddie's back in school. Your mother moved to Asheville, says the air's better." "Good for her," I replied, voice flat. He finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear, not of me, but of his own reflection in my success. It's a strange thing, watching someone see themselves clearly, only because you forced them to. He swallowed hard. "I was wrong." "I know," I said. "I don't expect forgiveness." "Good." He blinked, and then came the words I didn't see coming. "But I do wish I had protected you the way you protected us." That one cut a little deeper than I expected. Not because it excused anything, but because, for the first time, he used the right verb, protected. Because that's what I had done. For years. Shielded him from debt collectors, from lawsuits, from ruin. I had rebuilt his legacy and carried it like a coffin while he drank and collapsed and cursed the wind. And now he saw it. Now it was too late. "I'm sorry," he said again. I nodded once. "Thank you." He opened his mouth as if to say more, but I stepped back. "You don't need to keep apologizing," I said. "I don't need you to grovel. I just need you to stay in the past." He looked stunned, but he nodded, and I walked away. Outside, the autumn wind cut through my coat, sharp and clean. I found Marisol waiting by the university gates, arms crossed, eyes scanning. "Did he say it?" she asked. "Say what?" "What they all eventually say when they realize you didn't need them." I smirked. "Yeah, he said it." She looked at me. "And?" "And it doesn't matter." She grinned. "That's how you know you've won." That weekend, a blog post began to circulate. It was anonymous, but everyone knew. Title: What happens when you cut out the heart of a company? It told the story of a founder's daughter, unnamed, who had saved a family business only to be pushed out by ego, erased by greed, and how that daughter went on to build something 10 times stronger. The tone wasn't bitter. It was quiet, regretful. It was frank. He couldn't say it to my face, but he could say it in public under the cover of distance and anonymity. And honestly, that was enough. Because that blog post went viral. Not because it was well written, but because everyone has a Rachel. Someone underestimated, someone dismissed, someone who turned pain into progress and never looked back. It became a mirror, and suddenly everyone in the industry started reevaluating who they'd tried to bury. I hadn't driven past the Monroe house in nearly 2 years. Not since the night I walked out of that family meeting. My name erased, my future stolen, my blood questioned. But something strange happened one Sunday morning in early spring. I was supposed to meet with a potential investor in Lambertville, and traffic on the main highway rerouted me through my old neighborhood. I hadn't even realized where I was until I saw it. The red brick house, the trimmed hedges, the 2 clean windows, the white front porch with the hanging fern baskets Evelyn used to water every Saturday morning like it was a sacred ritual. It looked exactly the same, and nothing like home. I slowed the car, not planning to stop, but then I saw someone on the porch. Connor, wearing sweatpants, hoodie, no shoes. He looked tired, hollow. He held a cigarette like he wasn't sure if he should smoke it or apologize to it. And beside him, leaning against the railing, was Maddie. She wasn't posing, she wasn't filming, she just stood there, quiet, pale, like someone who had forgotten how to smile. The house felt like a museum of mistakes now, still standing, but everything inside crumbling under the weight of what had not been said, what had not been done. I parked across the street. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Or some strange ache inside me that hadn't quite finished closing. Connor saw me first. He squinted like he wasn't sure if I was real, then stood. Maddie turned slowly. Her eyes widened. Neither of them moved toward me. I got out, walked across the street. The sound of my heels on the pavement was the only thing that filled the morning air. When I reached the porch steps, I didn't climb them. I stood on the grass and waited. Connor cleared his throat. "Didn't think you'd come back." "I didn't," I said. "I was rerouted." Maddie gave a soft, humorless chuckle. "Story of all our lives, huh?" We stood in silence for a moment. Then she said something I didn't expect. "Rachel, I'm sorry." I looked at her eyes. They were glassy, hollow, and honest. It startled me more than anger ever could. "For what?" I asked quietly. "For clapping," she said. "That night, when Dad said you weren't his. I don't know why I did that. I thought I was safe, that if I sided with him, I wouldn't be the next target." Connor spoke next. I laughed, I remember, and afterward, I told Maddie that you'd probably disappear. Go teach somewhere, or marry some tech guy and fade out. He looked down. "I didn't think you'd rise." That made me smile, not cruelly, but quietly. "You didn't think," I said, "because you never had to." They both nodded. I let them sit in that silence. Then Connor asked the question I had waited years to hear, but no longer needed. "Do you hate us?" I looked up at the house, at the windows I once stared out of, wishing someone would understand me, at the door that once opened to a girl who believed loyalty could fix anything. Then I said, "No, I don't hate you." Maddie inhaled sharply. Connor looked shocked. "But I don't owe you anything either," I continued. "Not closure, not friendship, not redemption. I've built something on the ground you buried me in, and you'll never have keys to it." Maddie's lips trembled. Connor looked away, and I added, "Forgiveness isn't always an invitation. Sometimes it's just freedom." They said nothing. They didn't beg. They didn't defend. They just stood there. And I knew they understood. I turned to leave. As I crossed the street, I heard Maddie whisper behind me, "She really did it." And Connor quietly, "She really doesn't need us anymore." I got into my car, closed the door, drove away, and didn't look back. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when no one can touch you anymore. It doesn't roar. It hums, quiet and constant, like the soft breath of the life you finally chose. I found that peace in the sound of soldering irons, in the laughter echoing through the new Phoenix facility, where sunlight spilled through tall windows and the walls were painted in shades of bold hope, colors no Monroe factory ever dared to use. We'd moved into our permanent headquarters 6 months after the Rutgers panel. It was no longer a garage startup or a shared incubator or a borrowed lab. It was ours. Every desk, every floor tile, every prototype locked behind temperature-controlled glass. The staff had grown. Dozens now. Engineers, designers, support, interns from programs I personally funded. Many of them were women. Many of them were the underdogs, people who reminded me of a younger version of myself, quietly waiting to be told they belonged. I told them with promotions, with opportunities, with doors no one could slam in their faces. And every Friday afternoon, without fail, we had open bench hour, where anyone from interns to operations staff could pitch an idea, a tool, a sketch. We funded at least one every month. Some flopped, but some flew. Because that's what happens when you stop demanding people prove their worth before you let them speak. You realize they were brilliant all along. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the open courtyard behind the building. It had become my favorite place, fountains bubbling softly, vines curling up trellises, picnic tables under elm trees. Elise sat across from me, sipping tea like a queen in exile who still ruled from the shadows. "You did it," she said, setting her cup down. "You really, really did it." I smiled. Some days I wake up and expect it to be gone. She tilted her head. "That's trauma, not humility." I laughed. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's that I spent so long proving I could survive. I never really believed I could thrive." Her eyes softened. "And now that you are?" I looked around, at the sunlight, the laughter from inside, the way people walked these halls like they had ownership in their bones. "Now I just want to protect it," I said. "Not control it, not hoard it. Protect it." That's the difference between people who build something from pain and those who inherit it without bleeding for it. One nurtures, the other consumes. And I would never be like them. That evening, as the staff packed up and lights dimmed, I walked the halls alone. I paused at the door of our innovation wing, where a new prototype hummed quietly in testing. I reached out, touched the glass, felt the thrum of something alive. A year ago, I was staring at the cold walls of a sold-out factory. Now the walls breathed with dreams I helped birth. My phone buzzed, a text from Evelyn. "I saw your interview today. I'm proud of you. Your father would be too. The real one." I stared at it for a moment, typed one word, "Thank you." Not because I forgave her, but because she was trying. And sometimes trying is the apology. I tucked the phone away, stepped outside into the night air, and breathed, for the first time in years. There was no weight on my chest, no fear, no begging to be seen. I was home. But not because someone gave it to me. Because I built it with bare hands, trembling resolve, and a fire they thought would burn me alive. Instead, it lit the way forward. Success, when it finally settled into my bones, didn't look like magazine covers or bank statements. It looked like quiet, the kind that hums through the trees on a Sunday morning while you sip coffee barefoot on your porch, knowing you don't owe a single soul a damn thing. I'd bought a house out in Holmdel, not a mansion, not some cold, glass-walled fortress screaming, "Look at me now." No, this place had character. A crooked staircase, a front door that stuck when it rained, an old oak tree in the backyard that I swore leaned just a little to the left, like it was always listening. I didn't buy it to prove anything. I bought it because it felt like mine. Some nights I'd sit out on the porch with a book I never finished, a blanket across my knees, and the wind threading through my hair, and I'd feel something I never thought I'd taste again: safety. Not the kind built on someone else's rules or fragile love, but the kind you plant yourself, water with every sacrifice, and guard like a secret garden. And on one particularly golden evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in apology and lavender, I heard tires crunch on gravel. A car pulled into my drive. It wasn't Connor, not Maddie, not even Frank. It was a woman, mid-30s, nervous hands, hopeful eyes. She stepped out clutching a folder to her chest. "Miss Monroe?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled, shaky but sincere. "My name's Jessica. I'm a single mom. I used to work at the old Monroe Circuit Works before it closed. You probably don't remember me." I did. Not her name, but her eyes. I'd seen them before. Tired, overworked, invisible. "I was a line tech," she said. "Back when your dad ran it, I didn't have a voice then, but I heard what happened to you and what you did after, and I had to say thank you." She handed me the folder. Inside were blueprints, notes, a prototype sketch. "I've been working on a small power converter for tiny homes. It's messy, I know, but I've never had anyone to show it to." I looked up, met her gaze. She wasn't asking for charity. She was asking for what I had once begged for and never received: a chance. "I know it's a long shot," she said quickly, stepping back. "I just figured, if anyone would understand, come by the office on Tuesday," I said. "We'll look at it together." She blinked. "You're serious?" "I built my company on people like you," I replied. "Why would I stop now?" She nodded, tears welling, and then, just like that, she drove away. I stood there for a long time holding that folder, and I realized this was the revenge. Not humiliation, not public takedowns, but giving someone else the break no one ever gave me. That was how I erased the past, not by burning it down, but by building something better right in front of it. Months passed, and one day I found myself walking through a tech expo in Boston. Phoenix Circuitry had a booth, but I let the team handle it. I wanted to wander, to be anonymous for a moment, and as I passed a panel on legacy engineering, I heard my name. One of the speakers, an industry leader, was referencing me. "She proved," he said, "that bloodlines and boardrooms don't define innovation. Sometimes the best leaders come from the edge of collapse." Applause. I stepped away before anyone saw me, because I didn't need the stage anymore. I'd already won. In rooms they didn't even know existed, in hearts they never thought would listen, in a world I built without permission. One night, months later, I got a letter, handwritten, from Evelyn. "Rachel, I've moved to a small cottage in Asheville. I grow tomatoes now. I read books I don't understand, and I talk to your father's old painting, the one of you by the lake. I tell him you're doing well, even though I know he already sees it. Thank you for building the life I was too afraid to imagine. Thank you for forgiving me more than I deserved. I am proud of the woman you became without us. Love, Mom. I folded the letter, set it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just smiled. Because she was right. I had built a life without them. And it was glorious. Not loud, not flashy, but whole. And if there's a better ending than that, I've yet to find it. If you've ever been told you weren't enough, if someone once made you feel replaceable, invisible, or unworthy, let this story remind you. You don't need a seat at their table. You can build your own house. And when they come knocking, you don't even have to answer. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been doubted, underestimated, or pushed aside like Rachel? What would you say to your Frank if you could speak without fear today? Like, comment, and share if this story hit a little too close to home.